like to thank everyone who came out here today to address this important and obviously very quickly developing issue that is very important for our country and important for the world as a whole, given the amount of countries who have already been infected or at risk for infection. But I think what's very key to recognize here is that this infection has been controlled very well by our health professionals, and that our health professionals are actually, number one, the best in the world at dealing with these kind of issues, and number two, have procedures in place, have learned from past failings and within the small, minuscule parts of their procedures, and are willing to work to move forward. So we've seen a number of new Ebola cases that have come out in the past 24 hours, where individuals who allegedly have gotten infected at a Denver Broncos football game. So what we've done is that the individuals who have moved across state lines to West Virginia and to Maine have been quarantined within their medical facilities. We've gotten statements from the directors of these medical facilities stating that if someone comes in with a travel history to an area where Ebola has been found, based on CDC recommendations, they'll go to an isolation room and have further examination and history testing that will be done as directed by the CDC. So none of these patients are in contact with anyone else in these medical facilities. They've been cordoned off and isolated within full wings of these medical facilities. So I think that's very important to recognize that if you do have someone who is at one of these hospitals in Maine, Colorado, or West Virginia that isn't potentially infected with Ebola, that they are not in contact with this person. We also think that given that we've only seen a very small number of cases within the United States, that it actually is very easy for us to, at least in the medical sense, make sure that these individuals are, number one, and most importantly, being taken care of, and number two, that they're not coming into contact with other individuals. And the other important thing to recognize is that we are working with the Broncos organization to get a list of all attendees to the football game, and if any of those attendees do show signs of deteriorating medical conditions that are consistent with the symptoms of Ebola, that we would be willing to make sure that those individuals are also go through the process that anyone who has been confirmed with Ebola has. But we're not going to take the 60,000, 70,000 people in attendance at that game and quarantine all of them, because Ebola is not an airborne contracted illness. It is an illness that is contracted through the sharing of bodily fluids or by eating things or touching things that are contaminated with the disease. So it's very different if someone just simply happened to be sitting within a couple hundred feet of someone who may have been infected. So Ebola came to the U.S. through no fault of anyone. We live in a globalized society, and things that happen in one country are bound to affect another. Promoting an isolationist or protectionist ideology through closing our borders or inciting mass hysteria and making it seem like Ebola is an African problem or a black problem is not something that we want to do. We think that it's actually better to handle we've handled the medical response as well as we can, but what we need to do and what we will continue to do is make sure that the impacts of the misinformation are minimized within our society. And that just because someone is sick, or just because someone went to a football game or is in the same city as someone who did contract the disease, does not necessarily mean that millions of people will be getting this disease overnight. I thank you for your time, and I'm willing to take any questions if we're doing that now or once the Republicans speak.
Questions?
Is it true that Senator Edwards is being quarantined at the Portland airport upon her return from her trip to Dallas, where she was in close proximity to the Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital?
No, that's not true. Senator Edwards is feeling ill this morning. She has a migraine headache from the nonstop campaign that she's been doing. We're giving her today to catch up on sleep because not having this proper sleep and not being able to function with this migraine is something that is hard for her campaign, but we're willing to give her the time to be healthy and happy.
Other questions?
Sure, David.
Oh!
Thank you. You said that I believe you said in your response, we've done everything we can do from a healthcare perspective. Do you believe that the CDC has handled this response competently?
Yeah, I believe from a medical perspective, we've handled this response quite confidently, in that it is a new disease, one that has not been necessarily a disease that Americans have been affected with before. Given that, we think that we've seen a very small number of cases, and that the people who have contracted these cases in many instances have been able to recover, and those people who've been in contact with them have been able to recover. We do think the CDC has handled this very well as they could have given all of the constraints.
Today, the CDC confirmed 12 new cases of Ebola throughout our nation, in Maine, West Virginia, and Denver. I'm maintaining constant contact with the CDC and the Obama administration as our government coordinates response to this development. And there are a few things which our nation must do to fight Ebola and to curb the spread of this disease. First, it is indeed it is past time to impose a travel ban from West African nations that are heavily stricken with this disease. There is no reason to allow more cases of this disease into our nation. The policy of screening travelers at our airports has been proven to fail, and we ought not tolerate another case of Ebola coming from abroad. We will provide exceptions and necessary monitoring for aid workers and other patriots who are helping to combat this disease abroad. Second, patients who contract this disease must be moved to regional hospitals with infectious disease experts on staff who have the necessary resources and training to treat and contain this disease. Local hospitals have been shown to be unprepared to properly treat Ebola patients. Third, although we must take all necessary measures to stop the disease at home, our best path towards eradicating Ebola is by taking it on at its source. That's why I support the President in deploying the necessary resources to West Africa. Now is not the time to dwell on past mistakes or to get caught up in political bickering. It's not the time to allow ourselves to become paralyzed by the mass media hysteria and fear-mongering. We must remain calm and focused. We must move forward with strong and decisive action. We're the strongest nation in the world. We have the best healthcare professionals in the world. Let us pray for the health and safety of the patients and their families. I remain absolutely confident that if we work together as Americans, we can eradicate Ebola from our nation. Thank you. I'd like to call up two of my top advisors to assist in the answering questions, Mr. Wyman, Ms. Brent.
Questions?
There's like undoubtedly been some hysteria surrounding the outbreak of Ebola in the United States. Are you afraid that American citizens are eventually going to take things into their own hands?
Who was the first one you said?
Sorry. There's undoubtedly been some hysteria about Ebola coming to the United States.
Hysteria.
Hysteria.
Hysteria. People are getting hysterical. I'm scared.
Are you afraid that American citizens are going to eventually take things into their own hands if they aren't satisfied with the administration's response?
I'm not sure what you mean by taking things into their own hands. I believe the United States federal government is well equipped to maintain any hysteria management. I don't think there's going to be any rioting, if that's what you're getting at.
I think everybody understands that if we do things which Senator Russo has advocated for, if we move people to the hospitals that have the necessary training to treat patients, then there's no reason for Americans to do that, because they're the best equipped to combat the disease, and Americans understand that.
Do you really think that shutting down travel is going to be effective?
Yes, we do. We do believe that, because I mean, if you look at how the disease has come here, it came from a man who had Ebola. He went through the process of screening, and they didn't catch it. If we had shut down, I mean, what's important to keep in mind here is that there is no direct travel from West Africa to the United States. There are no direct flights. Therefore, it's very easy for us to monitor those who have West African passports. They can't come through, but those who are over there, who are Americans or are treating aid workers, those people we can monitor and provide the necessary quarantine for 3 weeks and allow them to come back and forth. So I think that this will be effective. There's no reason why we should have another person coming and bringing the disease again.
Okay, so Ebola is not an African problem, it's a world problem. Why do you think that, like, simply by saying if you own a passport of a certain country, you're not welcome in this country anymore, what does that say about America, given that, like, it's very clear that it's just simply not a specific, like, Liberian or Nigerian problem? And if we're not welcoming these people into our country, we're not even giving them the freedom of movement, how do we expect to, like, be taken seriously if we're just simply enacting isolation
To
policies?
be taken seriously, they were the United States of America. Our job is to protect our citizens first. We will pledge all the aid we can, all the necessary support of other countries that we might. But at the end of the day, our duty first is to the United States of America and its citizens. We need to combat this in any way that we can. Enough has not been done yet, and we need to start by making some strides in the right direction.
And I think if you look at our response and our policy, we explicitly acknowledge, we understand this is a global problem, a global issue. We support sending resources abroad to wherever Ebola may be. We support taking necessary action here at home because we understand that it's already spread here. But as Senator Russo just said, our first obligation is to protect our citizens. The overwhelming majority of cases are in these West African nations. That's just a fact. And so we understand that if it's going to come to the United States, it's most likely going to come from there. We're going to do everything we can to support those countries, but we also have to protect our citizens first.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions today.